revisiting some of the best games of this year with some of the best guests in the show's history. I'm Johnny Cullen. Welcome to my favourite game.
Alright. No need for that anymore. It's a bit snobby and idiotic listening to that again. Anyway. Hi. How have you been keeping? You good? I like that haircut you got. How's that dog of yours? Oh, you have a cat? Awkward. Welcome to my favourite game of 2017. As you may have noticed if you're a regular listener of the show, over the past year or so, there's been no Season 5 or a regular stream of episodes. I'll explain all of that in proper detail at the end, but to give the TLDR version, I had no more enthusiasm and made to do any more episodes after the end of 2016. We'd just started recording Season 5, but I felt I was doing it for just the sake of doing it. Thankfully, I'm back, we're back, and not just for this episode, but I mean in general too. We're doing it properly. We'll talk more of what's to come from my favourite game at the end of this episode. It is an unquestionable fact, at least to me anyways, 2017 has been the greatest year in games. Ever. Think of all the great years before it. 1998 with Zelda Ocarina of Time, Half-Life, Metal Gear Solid, the original StarCraft, the original Silent Hill. Then think of 2007 with Halo 3, Modern Warfare, the Orange Box, Mass Effect, Uncharted, Assassin's Creed, and then just 4 years ago with 2013 and The Last of Us, GTA 5, Tomb Raider, Bioshock Infinite, to name but a few. 2017 has easily outdone them all, and then some. You will not find a better year of diverse, quality games from teams of all kinds than this one. And certainly you will not find an insane, hectic release period than January through April this year. Even March's 3 big games, which will be covered here in all of its entirety, all came within a week of each other. Let's talk about the first parties. Nintendo came back to dominance once again and showed why you should write them off at your own peril with the launch of the Switch, and in turn, one of the best year one lineups for any platform by a first party ever. Sony continued from strength to strength, putting out a fantastic lineup of games on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation VR, with a massive go-to contender kicking off the spring and tying in some massive third-party games to the platform with heavy marketing. Microsoft on a software level didn't have as good a year as the other two, but did go out with a bang, introducing the Xbox One X in early November, and showing a console that is as powerful, if not more so, than its competitors. All in all, 2017 has been an incredible year for games, but one game in particular has dominated conversation, not only becoming the consensus game of the year, but in turn also one of the greatest games ever made. But we'll get to that. No, seriously, we'll get to that at the end. A lot of people want to talk about this game. Before that though, let's kick off our annual special by first talking of a game that by right shouldn't have existed in the first place. In 2010, Square Enix released Nier for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, related tangentially to the Drakengard series, and also released as 2 different games for the PS3 and Xbox 360 in Japan as Nier Replicant and Nier Gestalt? No one knows. No one can pronounce it. Anyways, the latter being the version that came west anyway. It was not looked upon too fondly. Reviews were mixed at best, with even one reviewer handing in their review having not finished the game. No, I'm not naming names, although an internet search will give you what you're looking for. But the oddest thing then happened. It started developing a cult following. Former Eurogamer US news editor Jeffrey Metcalfe put it best in an article he wrote for the site, saying it was a game that got better with age, and put down one of his reasons why for him loving the game as he did being the fact that it had a sense of wonder that few other games at the time didn't have. Nevertheless, whilst the new Drakengard game followed the original Nier's release, an actual Nier sequel felt like it was in the nether realms of impossibility. But then at E3 2015, a bombshell. At Square Enix's E3 press conference that year, it announced a new Nier game, co-developed by Square Enix, with the original game's director and producer duo, Yoko Taro and Yosuke Saito, heading up the project, along with Bayonetta and Metal Gear Rising developer Platinum Games. A year and a half after the game's announcement, Nier Automata dropped in March of this year for PlayStation 4 and PC. As someone who's never played the original, but did somehow manage to find and buy a copy of it relatively cheaply, thank you for that £5 copy and sparing me from eBay, CEX. Mwah! I didn't expect too much of Nier Automata considering Nier's original track record and Platinum's iffy-ish track record outside Bayonetta and Metal Gear Rising, outside a fantastic gameplay battle system. Boys, girls, was I wrong? Massively. In a big way. Enough to say right here, right now, that my name is Johnny Kong, I am the creative producer and host of My Favourite Game, and not only is Nier Automata my favourite game of 2017, it is now also one of my favourite games of all time as well.
So, where do we even begin to talk of Nier Automata? And without trying to spoil as much shit as possible, because there is some stuff you need to find out for yourself. And that bit can't be emphasized enough. There is so much to discover about Nier Automata that to try and encourage you not to find them would do the game a great disservice. Simply put, to begin with, I just absolutely love the relationship between 2B and 9S. Straight up love it. Starting out, it's cold and distant, but as the game progresses, they get closer and closer to the point it actually is wonderful. But there's so many complex layers as well to the relationship even then. But to understand them, you need to go and play the game if you haven't already. And that's not without mentioning A2, who has a massive part to play in the story as well. Then you get characters like Pascal, the most wholesome character you will ever meet in a video game. And if you find another character who is as wholesome and sweet as Pascal is in a game, you, sir or madam, are lying out of your arse. Fact. Not to mention the yin and yang duos of Adam and Eve, as well as Devola and Papola. Is that how you pronounce that? There are so many mysteries, and madness especially, which I'll touch upon in a second, to this game, that to go further on that aspect is ruining a classic story, so I'll leave it for the most part at that, other than one final bit of advice. Keep playing beyond ending A. I cannot stress that enough, so I'm going to say it one more time. Keep playing beyond ending A. You may be thinking, once you finish up getting ending A, why you're playing onwards again. Trust me, all will make sense. So please, if you only trust me on one thing for the rest of your life, it's that you keep playing Nier Automata past ending A and get endings B through E. Story stuff aside, Nier Automata's gameplay is just as stylish and fun as it looked from its first gameplay video in late 2015, though this is Platinum Games we're talking about here, and it is an absolute joy. The soundtrack from Keiji Okabe and Keigo Hayashi is beyond incredible, with Copied City and Weight of the World particularly personal favourites of mine. Some of the game's bosses are some of the best I've played in games in recent times in terms of how diverse each one throws up from a gameplay perspective, and some of the environments in the game, particularly the fairground, are just as charming in differently weird but also wonderful ways. Look, I said I wouldn't say anything else in the story, and I won't, but I have to touch on at least this aspect of it. There is a whole lot of madness that happens in this game that has you on a roller coaster of a lifetime from start to especially finish. Whilst Platinum did its part massively and did it well, Nier's method of madness came primarily from director Yoko Taro, helped out by his right hand man producer Yosuke Saito, and honestly, how Taro convinced Square Enix higher ups to make a game so out there, so insane with its themes of humanity, love and more, is an indescribable achievement in itself. I am for batshit insanity in games. There's a reason why I have a fondness for Kojima after all, and why Death Stranded is my most anticipated game right now. You have seen the Game Awards trailer, right? But as someone going into his work for the first time with Automata, Taro just takes it up to a whole new level, and I am all in for whatever comes next from Taro. But with Square Enix saying Nier will be a franchise going forward post Automata, I can only hope that the team of Taro and Saito and Platinum Games, such an incredibly effective pairing the first time, can come back and make magic together again. Hell, we now live in a world where not only Nier is a franchise in Square Enix's eyes, but Bayonetta 3 is an actual thing. God, those are actual things. Look, I digress. Nier Automata is nothing short of incredible. It shot right into my top 10 games of all time for a magnitude of reasons, most of which I can't really mention out loud on this show because of spoilers. And I know I could just give a spoiler alert right here and now and go nuts, but I'd be taking away any reason for you to play the game. So I'm just going to end it with this one final bit of advice. Embrace the ride that is Nier Automata and let it consume you for what it is. It is, without question, my favourite game of the year and one of my favourite games of all time for that madness. Embrace it.
If you had asked me at the beginning of 2017 what my favourite game of the year would probably be, I would have confidently said it's either going to be Breath of the Wild or Persona 5. After all, they are mainline sequels in two of my favourite franchises of all time, and since there's no new mainline Final Fantasy game this year, one of those two would surely take the title, or at least so I thought. It turns out, there is one game that in my mind surpasses both. My name is Dan and I'm a community manager at Square Enix, and my favourite game of 2017 is Nier Automata. Now hold on a second, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, he works at Square Enix and picked a Square Enix game. What a biased cop-out.
Well, that saves me having the added disclosure.
Now, truth be told, I'm actually a little surprised myself that Nier Automata is my game of the year. But I actually can't remember much of Breath of the Wild, other than the amazing fight through Hyrule Castle and with Ganon at the end. And the thing I remember most about Persona 5 is how the end of the game is full of plot holes, makes no sense, and that the game is not as good as Persona 4. Don't at me. Now, I still love Breath of the Wild and Persona 5, but Nier Automata is the only game this year that I still think about, and that's not just because I work on it. It's an incredibly powerful and emotional game that continually surprises you. And it's really tough to talk about without spoiling anything, but I'm still going to try. But first, let's take a small step back. Now, to sum up Nier Automata in one sentence is basically you play as humanoid androids who are sent to fight a proxy war against machine life forms who have taken over the Earth and take back the planet for humanity. Now, I always knew I was going to enjoy Nier Automata. The original Nier had a fantastic story, fantastic characters, amazing voice acting, and music, but the graphics and gameplay is where it suffered. For Nier Automata, Platinum Games co-developed it, and the original Nier staff were back on board, so I knew that the game would be good. But I didn't know how good. Now, gameplay-wise, it's not as deep as Bayonetta, or as precise or as reactionary as, say, Metal Gear Rising, but Platinum Games added some RPG mechanics and created a really fun sci-fi action game. But where Nier Automata really comes into its own is with its story and genre-bending gameplay. 1 minute, the game is a character action game. The next is a top-down shooter, then a side-scroller. But the thing you have to remember about Nier Automata is that nothing goes the way you think it will. Now, the beauty of this game is how subversive it is. The game goes out of its way to subvert gaming tropes and conventions, but it also does it in very subtle ways. Sometimes it's so subtle, you might not even realize it's done it at first. A good example of this is the multiple endings. Now, Nier Automata has 26 endings, one for every letter of the alphabet. Really, only endings A to E are actually story endings, and the rest are jokes. But the endings of A through to E are not endings in the more traditional sense of video game multiple endings, because they follow almost directly on from each other. The outcome isn't often a change in the ending like other games, it's a continuation of the story, and in some ways they're not endings at all. Now, another example is the lack of an autosave, and the relationship between that and death. Now, this is something that frustrated some players, but the reason for this design choice is explained, and you guessed it, subverted later on in the game as part of its story. And speaking of the story, oh boy, this is probably Nier Automata's greatest strength. When you first start the game, you probably think that this is a pretty cool sci-fi action story, and it certainly starts out that way. However, the more you play, the more questions the game throws at you, and the more mature themes start to present themselves. Now, Nier Automata's story is layered and complex in very personal ways. It's a story about war, love, humanity, grief, depression, and finding help and purpose in life. It's heavy, unexpected, and told in such a personal way, it's almost impossible not to be drawn in and be affected by it, especially considering the subject matter is really talked about. But the funny thing is that Nier Automata is also weirdly Japanese. While the main story is really sad, there's also a lot of weird quirks in it. One side quest involves awkward and quite hilarious conversations with a machine life form about how babies are made, and another involves obtaining mackerel as a reward that is delicious but kills you instantly if you eat it by using it as an item. But then again, there's a side quest where a machine life form also kills itself after you beat it in a race. After it sees no point in living, now he is no longer the fastest. So, you know, all ends of the spectrum. So anyway, I said the story was Nier Automata's greatest strength, but I might actually backtrack a little, as we have to talk about the music. The soundtrack is the best soundtrack of the year, and just like the story, it's personal emotive and layered, as well as catchy. Now, I adore the Persona 5 soundtrack, but here's the difference between that and Nier Automata's. Persona 5 soundtrack is a wonderful collection of music, but it'd be good music even if it wasn't part of the game. Now, Nier Automata's soundtrack is also this, but it also transforms the game playing experience. The way the music is layered, the instrumentation, the way it changes to 8-bit versions on the fly when hacking, the way it changes your emotional state makes the game more powerful in a way that can only be done because it's a video game. And I think that's the key to why Nier Automata is such an incredible game. Each of the individual elements, the story, the gameplay, the music, they're all at an impeccable level of quality already. But when they're weaved together in this incredibly smart and incredibly subversive way, it's unlike anything else, or at the very least, unlike anything else in recent memory. It constantly keeps you guessing, it pokes fun at itself, and challenges your perceptions in a way only a video game can, which is why it's so unique. Now, I wish I could talk about this more, but I can't do it without going into spoiler territory, so you'll just have to play the game before I can do that. So go now, go get it, go play it. Now, the question of our video games art isn't as trendy as it used to be, but when it inevitably comes up again, I hope people remember Nier Automata. Like games such as Shadow of the Colossus and Journey before it, Nier Automata uses the strength of the video game medium to tell a story and give a powerful experience that can only be achieved using the language and toolset of video games, and this is why it's my favourite game of 2017.
Hi, my name is Ed Fear. I'm a game designer and writer at Mediatonic, and my favourite game of the year is Nier Automata.
If you're a regular listener to the show, you may not have heard Ed on the show before. That's because he hasn't been on the past, but he will be in future. Ed is one of many guests you'll hear from Season 5 in this special. We're using this special as a platform to reveal some, not all, but some, of the lineup for Season 5. We'll talk more about Season 5 at the end, but for now, here's Ed to continue talking of Nier Automata.
It's hard to know where to begin to describe Nier Automata. I think the main thing about the game is just how unconventional it is, how it really seeks to surprise you at every turn, and never really keeps the gameplay the same. It's constantly things that you think would come next don't come next, and things that you never imagine would happen do happen. And I think that's what's so exciting about it, especially as games now really seem to have settled into this kind of loop of you play a game for 20 minutes and you understand how that game is going to be for the rest of the experience. Nier is absolutely not going to let you ever kind of settle down into a pattern. I actually think that the original Nier is probably a better game in some ways, in particular characterization, but Nier Automata is definitely the more accessible game. Because of how well Platinum Games have developed it, their experience with doing action gameplay means that it really it's a much better game all around than the original Nier. The thing I like about Nier Automata is how much it plays with structure. It's this really weird, it's kind of a linear game, and yet it has multiple endings, but you just keep on experiencing them in a linear fashion. And there's some really interesting things in how the game plays with perspective, literally, and how it will kind of switch between being, a third-person slasher to kind of a top-down shooter or a side-on platformer. But also it plays really interestingly with perspective narratively, in having you kind of revisit past events and get a new kind of understanding about what's going on. The quintessential example of that being the Beauvoir boss fight, which the first time is just this really cool, fun, dramatic boss fight with this kind of super operatic robot. But then when you play through again and you play through as 9S, you kind of come to understand more about who that character is, why they're fighting you, and it kind of becomes more of a tragedy. And that's a really interesting way of kind of re-experiencing the same events but in a different context. The music is just divine. The music in the original Nier was incredible, and I didn't really see how they would be able to improve on that perfection, and yet they absolutely did, especially in ways of how dynamically the music is played, and that keeps it really fresh, despite the fact you may be in the same area for so long. The game gets a lot of criticism for how formulaic the side quests are, and while that's absolutely true from a gameplay point of view, I think from a narrative perspective, they are really interesting, because they offer different perspectives on the core theme of the game, which is, this nature of humanity. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a created existence? And the way that you can kind of play through and experience these different perspectives of all these different quest givers, and especially as how many of them are the machines that you're fighting against, really can help you kind of find all of these different outlooks and really latch onto the ones that speak to you as a person. I've often felt it's quite a cop out when people say, I didn't intend to say anything with this game, it's for players to find their own meaning. But Nier Automata is actually the first game where I've really felt that the game actually gives you a possibility, because it gives you such a plurality of perspectives and viewpoints that you can find the ones that speak to you. I think what's interesting about the game is that it's kind of a really good example of how a AA game can exist now. Although on the face of it, it looks like a AAA game, the game really has been made with quite a tight budget. And that really shows, certainly in how the game reuses assets quite a lot. This whole idea of playing through the story multiple times is crucial to the structure, and it works brilliantly, but it is also there to stretch out a limited amount of content further. And there are certainly areas where the graphics aren't brilliant, but it was made on a low budget so that it could turn a profit on a low amount of sales. Given that Yoko Taro has never really made a game that surpassed 500,000. And by doing that, and by making it this more accessible game with Platinum Games, they've managed to create something really successful that's now, sold over 2 million. And, we're in a time now where the AAA games are becoming so gigantic, so bloated, so, everything and the kitchen sink, that sometimes it feels... Certainly as a developer, it can feel like that you need to throw everything into these games. They need to be everything, and that means they're really expensive. And that's why we're seeing, loot boxes and microtransactions, because the one price upfront fee isn't enough anymore. But Nier is a great example of how you can have this game that's really kind of lean. And it does have its own bloat in some ways, but it's lean, it's singular in vision, it's incredibly unconventional. It's not mainstream, it's not blockbuster, and yet it's a game that can be made on a budget and still sell really well and be unbelievably good. And I think that's a great example going forward that we need to look at as kind of AAA starts to crumble under its own weight. We need to look at Nier Automata as being a possible future of how games can be.
2015 would see the final Assassin's Creed game for a while. Syndicate would signal the end of a yearly release for the series since it first began with 2009's Assassin's Creed 2. In its place, Watch Dogs 2 would take AC's usual November slot. But even with the promise of it taking a break for a year, Ubisoft did say it would give more time to the next Assassin's Creed project if it was needed. Thankfully, that was not needed. The series returned in massive fashion in late October. Assassin's Creed Origins saw the series return to its roots, going back to 49 BCE and Ancient Egypt, as players played as Bayek. Speaking for myself, I've not played a great deal of Origins. In fact, I have a sort of mixed relationship with Assassin's Creed from Brotherhood onwards. But what I have played of it shows an Assassin's Creed that has changed from what had become the norm for the series, and sees a push forward for future installments. Whether that next installment comes next year is another matter. Place your bets on Watch Dogs 3 now. But going by Origins, Assassin's Creed's break was well needed, and in the end, it paid off dividends for Origins. Here's Volume and Subsurface Circular developer, and the head of the Indie Illuminati, Dan Pierce will agree with me on this, who also made a game about ships one time, Mike Biffle, to talk of Origins as his favourite game of the year.
Hi, I'm Mike Biffle, I make games, and my favourite game of 2017 is Assassin's Creed Origins. Which I'm surprised by. I genuinely wasn't expecting to finish up the year talking about Assassin's Creed. I've fallen off, definitely. I was a massive fan of the Altair and Ezio games. Black Flag was really good. But kind of other than that, I've been kind of a grudging Assassin's Creed fan. I've always liked kind of the idea of Assassin's Creed, I guess, more than the reality of the games they've made each time. Which is a shame because I'm a big history nerd, a big kind of sci-fi nerd, so it kind of should work really well for me. And it feels like this is the game where kind of for the first time in many years it actually did. I think that's down to a lot of things. I think first of all, they actually iterated. I think that's what a lot of this comes down to. They said in a lot of their marketing, oh, we've taken a year off in order to kind of really refocus the series and work out what we want to do. And I'll be honest, I was quite cynical about that. I kind of assumed that was a marketing spiel, that was kind of a that they had the movie coming out, so they didn't want to risk kind of a game launch the same time and overstretch themselves, and they were just going to add a couple of gimmicks. But it genuinely does feel sort of like a pause for breath in kind of what Assassin's Creed is. It's kind of going back to what I assume are the roots of the idea, the kind of exploring these big worlds, working out how to assassinate someone, how to get to someone, piecing together what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and then going for it. And it's much less linear. It feels much less linear than the other games. It feels, I mean, in terms of its meta structure, it's much more akin to something like the Witcher series, or kind of those open world RPG light kind of other games that have been around. But it makes good on that, and it doesn't feel like I'm just running down a corridor kind of Mafia 2 style. It feels like I'm actually kind of using my environment and finding stuff and getting better. Big part of that's the loot system, and it is that kind of Pavlov's dog with a Skinner box. I'm mixing my metaphorical, psychological study, whatever. But yeah, it's that kind of, there is that kind of piling on of kind of those really tasty kind of game loop unlocks of loot and ability trees and all that stuff, which definitely plays into it. That's definitely kind of a loop that I find very satisfying in games. But I think actually it's more to do with the feel of the game. I think there's stuff there that they've really kind of gone back to basics on what a lot of the fair criticism of Assassin's Creed up to this point has been, and kind of methodically fixed them. The combat's much better, melee flows really well, the ranged combat with bows and arrows is really nice. You've got a nice range of different kinds of bows and arrows, which I'm not sure is historically accurate. I'm not sure there was such a thing as a sniper's bow, or effectively a shotgun bow. Maybe there was, probably there was. But that's nice, that feels really good, that feels really chunky and good. kind of solid combat. Then you've got just little things like the fact that horse riding in Assassin's Creed has always been really dull. And you've got these enormous, beautiful environments, but you're kind of always seeing them from ground level, unless you're climbing through the rooftops, which is slower, so you kind of, you don't do that so much on the meta scale. Completely solved by the inclusion of the eagle, whose name I've forgotten, who you can jump into, and you can jump into when riding from one place to another. Which is really nice, just being able to kind of have my character kind of auto ride to a location, and I can use that eagle to fly around and look at all of the money Ubisoft spent on the environment, which is neat, and just a really nice little bit of game design, problem solving, which really appeals to me. On top of that, I love the story, weirdly, in an Assassin's Creed game. It's actually this kind of compelling structure to the story. They've kind of done a almost like a fake Shadow of War style Nemesis system. They've not done any mechanical stuff, but there is kind of a menu where they show the hierarchy of villains. You're working your way up by doing these assassinations. That's nice. It frames the story in kind of a game context, which is cool. But actually, I can follow what's going on. I can follow why I'm doing what I'm doing. Really love the central relationship of Bayek and Aya, who just have this marriage that feels very realistic, and feels very much like a long-term relationship between two people. And the in-jokes, the kind of the personality between them is really just compelling. And it's interesting that there is this trend of games telling stories about like adults who are at a later stage in their lives than Errol Flynn. They're actually kind of, though I imagine Errol Flynn was probably a lot older than he pretended to be in Robin Hood. Anyway, that's a tangent. But yeah, there's a real personality to that which I'm really connecting to, which I'm again surprised in an Assassin's Creed game that I'm connecting to the relationships of the characters. So all in all, I think it's more of a game of year of like being happy that it came together. It's that thing of it might not have been the most surprising game of the year in terms of something new or innovative, but in terms of like bringing me back to a franchise that I used to love and then kind of lost me along the way, and just bringing me straight back on board. I am now an Assassin's Creed fan again. It was a reassuring game of the year. It was very exciting to kind of play something that kind of won me back and fixed a lot of those kind of design problems the franchise had picked up.
What Remains of Edith Finch is one of the most unique, heartfelt, emotional, and genuinely gut-wrenching takes at death and grief, all told through the curse of the Finch family and the stories of how each of them died, told in many different and creative ways, to the point they could be considered anthology stories in a way. From Barbara's thriller slasher story, Molly's transformation into various animals, and Gregory's bath-filled adventure, among others. That's not to mention the incredible story of Louis Finch, which in many ways was the game's standout moment, and personally speaking, one that resonated a lot with me. Not to mention how it manages to essentially become two games in one. If The Unfinished Swan was a prologue for Giant Sparrow, its second act knocked it out of the park, and you can only imagine what comes next from them and the possibility it could even be better. In turn, it also shows Annapurna Interactive as a serious player for interesting and unique stories in games, and certainly they are the publisher to watch for next year, if not already.
My name's Christian Dunlan, I write for Eurogamer, and my favourite game of 2017 was What Remains of Edith Finch.
Donlan, like me, is a huge fan of what Giant Sparrow did with Edith Finch, and reckons it'll go on to massive success. As we do every year, the two of us talk of his favourite game together and what made it tick. But for Donlan, he didn't really start playing the game. Rather, it was someone else in his place, at least at first.
At first, I didn't actually play it myself. Sarah, my wife, is a huge fan of Unfinished Swan, which is the previous game by Giant Sparrow. And so when I said that, there's a new game coming out by these people, she wanted to play it. And I actually just sat and watched her play through it one evening, and it was just an extraordinary experience.
When I remember playing of Edith Finch, and I've not gone back to it since I finished it in April, I remember very fondly how each story, although it was related to the tangent of being within a family curse, it felt like each story felt like an anthology story of sorts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that I get where you're coming from. I think the idea of just all the separate stories that coexist within a family, everyone having their own story, and everyone's story being essentially separate from everyone else's, I thought was really brilliant. It sort of spoke to the way that in big families, people sort of live next to each other. You live very close by each other, but you still have these private worlds, which are very sort of, and seems to be a necessary part of sort of retaining identity in a big family. I thought it was also just a really interesting game in that games are often about people dying. You know, they're often about shooting people or blowing things up or trying to stop a nuclear bomb or something. But this was really a game about death as a sort of presence in our lives, and I thought that was very powerful. You know, I am 40 now almost, and you know, I'm ready to start considering these things. You get to a point where you just feel a bit more mortal, and I think it's quite good to have a game sort of that playfully explores that terrain, if that makes sense.
Like a game that's aware of death and grief in all its forms.
Well, yeah, but also just a game that talks about how these things are actually a part of life. And I was very receptive to that message, and I think it's beautifully done. I think it's also a game about, I was saying this to a colleague at work who didn't agree actually, but I was saying for me it was, what I took away from it is it's a game about the relationship that the living continue to have with the dead, which I think is something that we don't really think about very often. You know, the way that you continue to in some ways have a very one-sided kind of relationship with people who are no longer here, and I thought that was a really interesting thing to explore in a game where you have so many options for exploring it. I think they did it in actually a really, it seems kind of an odd word to use for a game like Edith Finch, which is so kind of creative and bursting with ideas, but their sort of treatment of the central theme was really delicate and actually sort of almost restrained, beautifully restrained. I thought it was, what an amazing game.
Especially considering there's not many games that do death or even grief fairly well. Like, the only example before What Remains of Edith Finch was Life is Strange, and I think that did that very well, especially grief, anyways.
Yeah, definitely. I think these are just things which you're gonna. I just think we need to get more games about these sort of things as the sort of avenue, the sort of the palette that games have gets a bit richer. You know, we see more of human life in there, and yeah, I just what extraordinary thing this was. And I don't know, I didn't see it coming. That's the other thing. If at the beginning of 2017, What Remains of Edith Finch was not a game I was thinking about. Pardon me. And by the end of the year, it's the only game that properly sticks in my memory, I think.
Hi, I'm Catherine Woolley. I'm a designer at Media Molecule, and my favourite game of 2017 is What Remains of Edith Finch. What Remains of Edith Finch, or what will probably call Edith Finch throughout this, is what you would probably call a walking simulator. It was developed by Giant Sparrow, and it was published by Annapurna. They created something pretty fantastical. You can pick it up on most platforms, so it's on Xbox One, PS4 and Windows, so there's not many excuses not to be able to play it. Luckily, nobody had spoiled the experience that I was about to play within Edith Finch. People had spoken to me about how there were words in the world, that it was an amazing story, that it was a great experience, but no one ever went into like nitty-gritty details. And I'm not about to do that to you either. I don't want to spoil this game for you. I had such an amazing time playing it that from, I don't know, experiencing each and every story within it, I was just, I don't know, blown away by them. And I don't want to spoil those moments for you. So the game itself is in first person perspective. Of course, you know, one of the best ways of telling stories, because then you're looking through the character's eyes and experiencing it as them but as you. So I mentioned the text ever so slightly before. Text in the world is handled perfectly. So any other game where you'd have subtitles, of course you'd have them in the default kind of subtitle position in the safe zone on the screen. Edith Finch puts them within the world itself. So of course we've had bits in games where text has been in the world, but I think they've handled it perfectly. They stage the text based off the direction you're kind of moving through the environment. So they'll always be ahead of you. They're not really easy to miss. If you're ever slightly looking away from where they are, they slightly nudge you to the side or like dampen the camera movement so you can not quickly move out of the way. They're an experience, they're part of the game, they want you to see them. In some moments in the game, the text is portrayed through different means, and through the main text from the main character who's talking, you'll see like lovely little ways of it just kind of coming in or disappearing. It's not always the same. I think one of the my most favourite bits I can remember, like, of text, you don't hear that in many games, was there was some dialogue when I had a fireplace in my main view, and the text kind of swooped up the fireplace, and it was just one of those lovely little touches that, you know, someone took the care of putting that in, and I'm happy that I then saw that and experienced that. If you ever want to think about putting text within a game but within the game itself, you should definitely look at Edith Finch. Visually, it looks great. They've created some fantastical environments, but nothing that doesn't feel very familiar. So you could say they've played it quite safe by having, you know, environments that you may not recognize, but like, I don't know, they feel normal to you. But then there's all these little tiny touches to it that make it feel a little bit alien, a little bit weird and eerie. So I think that really kind of contrasts with it nicely. I guess at times, like, it would make me feel like I was, okay, I guess one of the best ways to describe it is you could just say, like, Tim Burton. I suppose that's a good way. I mean, I'm thinking, like, Big Fish Tim Burton, so kind of, like, weirdness. But another thing visually is it also feels like there's nothing that ever feels out of place within the game. So your menu is the family tree, which you also use within the game itself. So think of it as your objectives within the game, but it's integrated so well that it doesn't really feel like that. The only thing you could say that breaks you out of the world at times is potentially there's prompts in the world when you can interact with things, but I don't think that they're that distracting, and I think they work quite well. Plus you learn how to move things in the world on your own accord, that you're not looking for that or looking to find out how to use things. I mean, as I said, it is a walking simulator, so the way you interact with the world is going to be very simplified compared to, you know, any kind of big action adventure kind of game. The narrative and the delivery of the narrative is where the game excels in my eyes. So the way it's woven around the game to tell stories is just sublime. They've definitely created an interesting way of telling a story. As an example, I guess the kind of stories that they're telling, if it was any other game, you'd probably be watching a cutscene whether it be an interactive cutscene or a non-interactive cutscene, but instead within Edith Finch, you're then playing through what I would say moments. They may not be moments that are related to you yourself through memories, but it's like you're there. That's the best way to put it without spoiling anything. But once again, it kind of ties in with the first person perspective, and it just works really nicely together. You could say the stories being told are from people from different ages, like a very, very wide range of ages. And I think that's really nice as well, because that's something you don't really see in many other games. I think one of my favourite characters, I'll say characters and not spoil anything at all. One of my favourite characters is Molly. If you play it or have played it, you probably know why. I didn't expect it. So yeah, that's a little bit of information on why I think What Remains of Edith Finch is my favourite game of the year. Of course, no spoilers. But yeah, you can pick it up for £15. It's really cheap, and I spent 3 hours in total playing and completing the game. So it's a nice short game for you to experience. So I give it plus points for that as well. And it's definitely a game that you need to play this year. Or you could play it next year as well, that's absolutely fine. But it's a game you should definitely play.
Hi, I'm Jordan Thomas of the indie game studio Question, and my favorite game of 2017 is Divinity Original Sin 2.
Coming off the back of the original game in 2014, Divinity Original Sin 2 made a massive step forward in an incredibly huge way. DOS 2 was highly praised for being a majestic RPG, and even hailed as one of the best RPGs of all time. Needless to say, Game of the Year list inclusions are not surprising for a game, considering developer Larian Studios delivered something special. Especially if you're being cited as one of the best RPGs of all time, mere months after release. You're going to hear from a pair who loved Original Sin 2 a lot this year, including an upcoming Season 5 guest. But they'll come after hearing first from Question Games founder Jordan Thomas.
I love this series. I was captivated by the first Original Sin game. I saw it as a truly virtuoso kind of combination of what I love about XCOM and Card Hunter and Final Fantasy Tactics, these sort of top-down, deeply strategic sort of tactical games, and a very nerdy term that we use for games like BioShock and Deus Ex and Dishonored, the immersive simulation, which is to say a often first-person kind of systemic tapestry that allows players to roll their own playstyle out of all sorts of different systems without being forced to. And so the first game, you know, had this sort of elemental system with water you can electrify and oil you can light on fire and all that kind of stuff. But with 2, they've added extremely robust drop-in cooperative gameplay, and this happened late in the life cycle of the first game as well. But the second game is so incredibly brutal from a combat perspective that dogpiling on it with 2 minds, both of whom are kind of tickled by that kind of combat puzzle, helps it feel less lonely and makes it a sort of social experience, a kind of mutual challenge to overcome. But in addition, they've designed Divinity in such a brilliant way that the world of Rivellon wants to be broken. They don't mind if you turn the plot on its head or solve a problem with some deeply unorthodox sort of hijinks. They embrace the presence of the player more fully than almost any game I've ever seen. Certainly any game with this breadth of content. So my friend Ken Strickland and I, we both worked on the South Park RPGs. And this is sort of a fun kind of moment for us to see how a very radically different team took on the problem of class-oriented gameplay, but with a lot of customization where classes can essentially be infinitely combined. You have skill trees and slots for spellcasting, so if you want to have a tank who is also able to summon a giant oily blob and tag team with that oily blob against his foes, no problem. You know, their character generation system embraces that. It truly feels like a kind of combat alchemy that integrates elements from many genres and many RPG systems without feeling too derivative of any of them. So beyond that, the environment of the game is set up so that anything that you ask yourself, can I do this? The answer is, well, probably, but with a sort of twist. Rather than it being a kind of wish fulfillment simulator, they always give you a shot at the thing you're trying to do, but the consequences are often unintended and can lead to a very memorable kind of crisis that you have to kind of talk your way out of or potentially fight your way out of. And because of that, I will forever love the process of save scumming it. Ken and I will crawl our way through the game and try the different ways in which an encounter might have played out. And rather than that seeming corrupt, it sort of feels like exploring parallel worlds. Like you're getting to know the dimensions of this experience that are intended for you to kind of explore hub and spoke. Normally save scumming is such a depressing process. It makes you feel like you're like a cheater or something, but in this case we really want to know what else is possible within that sort of constellation of choice and consequence.
Hi, my name is Alex Hutchinson. I'm the creative director and co-founder of the brand new game company Typhoon Studios here in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And my favorite game of 2017 is Divinity Original Sin 2. It's an isometric top-down role-playing game where you create your character or a party of characters, and then you set out into the world to try and grow an experience, evolve that character, and eventually stumble across adventure. Why do I love it? Mostly it's a sense of openness. First, in terms of exploration, you can pretty much head off in any direction you please from the very beginning of the game, and the world itself is vast and filled with surprises, challenges, and opportunities. But also mechanically, all the systems fit together really well in a game in a way that's unusual for this kind of game. You could push over a barrel of oil, then use a magic spell to set it on fire. You could also freeze a pool of water to create ice, which will make other characters slip over and fall. All of that feeds into the very robust combat system, which actually feels finished and complete in this rather terrific game. I also love the companions. They're exquisite in a way. They remind me a little bit of Baldur's Gate, if you're a fan of the early BioWare games. But they're far superior and feel much more finished and integrated in the experience. They can trigger side quests. They can drop out of your party. It really does feel like all of those sort of 90s CRPGs, but finished and polished. It's also packed with unique and awesome abilities. You can give your characters like Pet Pal, which allows you to talk to all of the animals in the game. Often that leads only humor, and the game is very funny, but occasionally it also gives you solutions to problems. Also, if you're undead, for example, as a character class, that's fine, but you may have to use magic objects to disguise your appearance, or you could just start wearing the faces of other dead people. Not even a joke. The writing is top-notch, the story is terrific. In video games these days, I often find myself completely overlooking or ignoring the game narrative in favor of my infinitely superior player narrative that I'm building, but this game forced me to pay attention just like its prequel. Oh, and it's enormous. It's a game you can get lost in and wander around for hundreds of hours, so it's perfect for a holiday. It hasn't hit consoles yet, but the first game was also ported immaculately to consoles, so get it anywhere you can. If you can't get the sequel yet, because you're only on console, then grab the original version, Original Sin 1. The writing is also top-notch. The dialogue itself is snappy, punchy, often very, very funny. The plot is fascinating and filled with twists and turns. Often these days in video games, I find myself pretty much ignoring the authorial narrative in a video game in favor of, the player narrative that I can build myself through mechanics. It is the unique element of video games, obviously, so the more the game lets me tell my own story, usually the more I enjoy it. But this game performed the magic trick of both allowing me to do pretty much what I want and also drawing me into a very well imagined, complete, and interesting universe. But as I mentioned before, its great strength is player choice, both in the mechanics, in the decisions I get to make about the eventual fates of different characters, and how you can solve most of the video game's problems is surprisingly open. You can choose to spare various characters or damn them. You can avoid combat as much as you need to engage in it, and it's a particularly satisfying role-playing game that emphasizes the act of role-playing just as much as it emphasizes the act of sort of combat or overcoming a set puzzle or problem. If you want to be an undead rat creature, you can. If you want to play as someone who avoids combat at all costs, you can as well. All of this feeds into the fact that it's a truly enormous game. You can wade into it for hundreds of hours if you want to complete all of the different side activities. And often these activities are more interesting than the central story thread. And part of the joy of it is ignoring that for large stretches of time and diving off in search of some strange artifact or pursuing a weird rumor you heard in one of the game's many pubs. It's a perfect holiday game. You can sit down and play for literally days at a time and truly immerse yourself in it. That said, it can be a double-edged sword. Don't jump into it if you don't want to take your time and really explore every nook and cranny. It's not a game to be rushed through. It's also not a fan of difficulty adjustment. It's not a game that's designed to make you feel like a winner at all turns. So if you stray from the beaten track, you can find yourself in situations where your best option is to take a note and leave so you can return later with more abilities and a better chance at victory. It also has a very powerful quest log. So even if you do unfortunately have to take a break from the game, you'll always see notes that are automatically taken that'll bring you back into both the story and into what you still need to do in the game. But it is the kind of game where if you're going to enjoy it, you need to get lost in it. You need to be able to be confused and not panic. Progress will not always be easy, so don't rush through it. Take your time and savor it. So happy Christmas, everybody. Please keep an eye out for Typhoon's Year of Announcements, which should kick off early in 2018. And if you're interested, please follow me for more news at BangBangClick on Twitter. Thanks.
Go to hell, Sherlock.
I am the FBI.
Well, at 20 minutes to 5, we can now say the decision taken in 1975 by this country to join the common market has been reversed by this referendum to leave the EU. We're out.
CNN projects Donald Trump wins the presidency.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
My idea is simply this. America was built by and for the white Christian people of this nation.
Well, we have energy, I think, because Donald Trump's election showed that the majority of white America, especially working class America, believes in sovereignty.
As Adolf Hitler said, he who controls the youth controls the future. And that is so true when it comes to our situation.
We're going to be running for your local school board. We're going to be running for your local county council.
What's the point of that?
Being able to have an influence in the local community.
And has died in Charlottesville, Virginia, in clashes between white supremacists and anti-fascist groups which have rocked the city.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. It's been going on for a long, long time.
This was a white nationalist rally. You have to call that out by name.
We are determined to take our country back. We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump, because he said he's going to take our country back, and that's what we got to do.
There was a group on this side, you can call them the left, or you've just called them the left, that came violently attacking the other group. So you can say what you want, but that's the way it is. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say,
"You will not replace us! You will not replace us! You will not replace us!"
Before we go any further, let me make my point of view very, very clear here. Black lives matter. Women's rights are human rights. Her body, her choice, her rights. No human is illegal. Science is real. Love is fucking love, no matter your sexuality. And if you dare say otherwise, I actually will have a problem with you. Big time. Kindness is everything. And no matter what, fuck Nazis. Now, with all that being said, let's turn back to the hopefully mostly fun aspect of our show. In 2014, Bethesda and Swedish studio Machine Games brought Wolfenstein back in a big way with The New Order, the first game in the series since 2009's self-titled effort, released before Bethesda had bought id Software, and as a result, their subsequent IPs. 2015's The Old Blood, comprising of what felt like DLC for The New Order, still felt like an appetizer for what would be the main course. After a blink and you'll miss it Easter egg tease at the beginning of its E3 2016 press conference, and just a few months before its reveal being described by Bethesda VP Pete Hines as fucking bananas, Wolfenstein 2, the new Colossus reveal at E3 this year, and subsequent release in October, was set against the backdrop of a rising social and political climate in the wake of Donald Trump's election win last November, with the rise of the alt-right and white supremacy groups, as well as a return to Nazism. Wolfenstein 2's release in some aspects couldn't have come at a better time for pure catharsis alone, but even taking that out, as well as an incredibly well-run Bethesda marketing campaign before its release, Wolfenstein 2 is still easily one of the best shooters of the decade between it, Doom and Titanfall 2, with a relationship unlike any other in games than BJ and Anya's. Needless to say, Wolfenstein 2 came at the right time, for better or worse. Here's Carly Vellucci to talk of it, and in case you need some Nazi punching music to go to, there's this from the E3 reveal trailer.
Separate ways, still the memory stays far away.
Hi, I'm Carly Veloci, and my favorite game of 2017 is Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. And in order to really understand why this game is my favorite of the year, despite the fact that it's probably not the best game made this year, I think you need to just look around you for a bit. I mean, 2017 was not a great year politically. I can only really speak as an American, but I can also speak as somebody who is a woman and who is Jewish. So seeing Nazis around was not very fun for me. You can say that, it's really exacerbated a lot of my, my triggers for my PTSD and my anxieties and my depression, just looking at the news every day and seeing all these people in power, who don't treat people well and who, just really don't have any sense of common human decency at all. And that's not even, I'm not even just talking about the Nazis there. I'm talking about, some of our more esteemed politicians here in the United States, without dropping names, which, I don't need to drop names because it's all obvious. Regardless, I will say that Wolfenstein 2 is probably my favorite game of the year because of its context. And I know that that wasn't probably something that Bethesda and Machine Games were planning on doing when they planned to release this game this year. But, it did work out. It did work out that, Charlottesville happened and that, free speech movements were becoming a thing. Not becoming a thing, they've always been a thing. But, they were on the news a lot. And, you have all these white supremacists in office like Steve Bannon. And it's all this frustration. And then you get this game that comes out. And it's a game that's basically allows you to shoot the people that you hate in the face. And it's so cathartic. And it's so satisfying in that regard. And that's not even really getting into the narrative, which I actually think is the strongest part of Wolfenstein 2. Like, the combat, as people said, is kind of a mess. And I'm not really much of a shooter person, so I also had a lot of problems. But what kept me going was the story about this man, BJ, who, he's close to death. He gets a second chance, but at the expense of others. And throughout the entire first half of the game, he's wondering, do I deserve this life? Do I deserve happiness? Do I deserve to defeat the Nazis? And some of the most beautiful moments in this very violent shooter about killing Nazis are when BJ is introspective, when he talks to Anya, his fiance at the end of the game, but his baby mama. And when he, talks to his other people and he talks about his feelings and, his concerns. And it's just so, sorry about that. It's so beautiful. And I think that probably this game also features the most beautiful moment in a game this year when, after killing a ton of Nazis after going up trial for numerous war crimes, he runs into a room and he comes across his dead mother. And his mother is Jewish. We learned this in the very beginning as she's saying prayers and telling him about his heritage. But we also find out that his father sent her off to the concentration camps after the Nazis took power. And it's such a beautiful scene because instead of BJ being angry, he gets sad and mournful and he collapses on her lap and just hugs her and talks about his future children and how the only thing he wants is to see her again. And she gives him this beautiful advice that something along the lines of, it only gets worse before it gets better, something like that. I'm not doing it justice, and it's this beautiful moment because then, spoilers, that's when the first half of the game ends and the second half of the game begins. And if you've played the game, you know how radically different the second half of the game is. But what I find most fascinating overall then about Wolfenstein 2 is how it's really able to kind of balance these two things, like this pulpy, violent, science fiction, war setting, but then with these beautiful moments of character. And it's not even just with BJ, it's between, you know, all the characters, like whether, you know, you choose Fergus or Wyatt, between all the other people you meet on the ship, and especially with Grace, who's a new character, and Spesh, who's her kind of, you know, her boyfriend, I guess is the easiest way to say it. But the game introduces so many characters, and yeah, they're all angry, and they're all so just vengeful, but at the very heart of it, they just want peace, and they just want family, and I think that's so beautiful. And I'm fascinated how the Wolfenstein series post the New Order is able to balance these so well, and is able to not forget that, yeah, this is a crazy shooter, but there's also these people on the inside here, and they have their wants and these wishes, and, you know, that's what drives the game forward. And just the fact that it came out in 2017, it only adds to, I guess, your sympathy towards these characters and your compassion towards them. So, you know, when you finally get to the end, and it's a little bit anticlimactic, I'll give it that, but it feels right, and you just kind of like sit back and sigh because you defeated the Nazis, and that's great. That's what we always wanted.
I'm Nels Anderson, and my favorite game of 2017 is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice from Ninja Theory.
In 2014, Ninja Theory lifted the veils off something new and different for them, coming off the back of the fantastic but controversial DMC. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice would see the studio self-finance and self-publish a new action-adventure psychological horror game. That's a bit of a mouthful. Whilst being open on its development through every step of the way, from its reveal at Gamescom 2014 through the release in August of this year. The game, seeing the titular character attempt to rescue the soul of her partner, was also pivotal in that Senua was someone who suffered from mental health issues, specifically psychosis. The game was acclaimed for its handling of the issue, plus its fantastic combat, and it also saw Senua actor Milena Jurgens win Best Performance at the Game Awards, and saw Ninja Theory make back every penny it put into the game, and then some. Here, a Season 5 guest talks of the game as their favourite of the year, including how their Nordic ancestors helped provide meaning to the game. That guest is Caledonia's Nels Anderson. Here he is, on why it's his favourite game of the year.
So I come from a family of Minnesota Swedes, as you may have ascertained from my name, on the off chance that you too are part of the Viking diaspora, or maybe even still hail from that particularly cold chunk of Northern Europe. And as a child, I remember my grandparents speaking Swedish to each other whenever they didn't want the rest of us to understand what they were saying. And I was also a tremendous dork of a child, so I spent many an afternoon at the library reading mythology tomes of all stripes. But I always had a fondness for Norse myths, though. Maybe because, albeit at rather lengthy remove, the people who told those stories were my ancestors. Plus Odin being willing to impale himself on a spear, hang himself from a tree, and then gouge out one of his eyes, all in exchange for knowledge, is like really hardcore. But there is a kind of tragic reservation to a lot of Norse stories. Ragnarok will come one day. Surtr and countless other Jotun and things darker still will come to Asgard. Vanir and Aesir will die. There's nothing that can be done to prevent this. Nothing can be done to stop it. But the gods fight, drink, lust, and live anyway. Odin keeps trading away body parts, looking for something, anything, that can be used to stop, win, or at least forestall the war against the giants. The gods know they cannot change their fate, but they refuse to submit to it and let it rule them either. And I think it's no coincidence that Hellblade takes place in the world of Norse mythology. Senua, the titular character, suffers from psychosis, but her struggle is that of those doomed by Ragnarok. She cannot rid herself of the voices she hears, of the things she sees which are not truly there. But her psychosis is not presented as some gift or blessing, anointing her as a chosen one. The depiction here is far more honest. It is neither blessing nor curse. It is simply a fact of who she is, no more and no less. And her struggle to save Dillion's soul from Hela is as much about her ultimately coming to terms with his death as it is accepting who she is. But she does not resign herself to who she is, or let it dictate what she can do or who she wants to be. Much has been said about Hellblade seeking to depict psychosis with the gravity it deserves. Ninja Theory's collaboration with neuroscientists and those personally afflicted with the condition make Senua's mental illness not something to be gawked at or mark her as other, but rather a thoughtful presentation of a real condition, albeit in fantastic circumstances. As an aside, the game's binaural audio is utterly transportative, and the game basically demands to be played with a set of good headphones. And the performances in the game are all exemplary, but especially that of Melina Juergens as Senua. And hers is particularly notable because she had no prior acting experience and was actually Ninja Theory's video editor, who was basically just doing a scratch track of mocap, but then just kind of demonstrated that she could actually command the whole performance, which is itself kind of an interesting, cool little tidbit. The game itself is focused, but still very high quality. The environments, the characters, and the animation can easily stand up with most other AAA games, but it was made on a far smaller budget and managed to do so by being economical and focused with just every aspect of the game's creation. It has no more than it needs to. No side quests, no collectible trinkets, just the story it wants to tell, and the place it wants to tell it in. It manages to be dark, mysterious, distressing, and alien, but still also tremendously relatable. I had basically no expectations really coming into the game at all, but I was left absolutely floored. It is definitely a very unique and singular game, and I think it is heartily worth anyone's time and consideration. So yeah, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is my favorite game of 2017.
Hello, I'm Alex Donaldson and I'm a video games critic for places like VG247.com and RPGsite.net. And my favourite game of 2017 is... well, it's complicated. The true answer to that question is that my favourite game of this year is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, but let's face it, Everybody's talked about Breath of the Wild to death. It's an incredible game, really brave and interesting and different and innovative, but it's been talked about a lot. Everybody knows that that game is amazing, and everybody knows that they should buy a Switch and play that game, or get it on Wii U if you want. So I wanted to talk about a different game, another game that affected me from 2017, and after a lot of agonising thought, I decided to settle on talking about a game that really had a big impact for me, and that is Sonic Mania.
Huh? Alright. Okay, let's get this over with. I guess we should talk of Sonic Mania then. And don't worry, we will get to Zelda. Promise. Anyway, this year has been a mixed year for Legendary Hedgehog. Sonic Forces came out in November, and unfortunately showed another 3D Sonic game that completely missed the mark. Again, if this was the only Sonic game released this year, it'd be par for the course. Except in August, the release of Sonic Mania, directed by Australian designer Christian Whitehead, who helped bring some of the series' older games to modern platforms, saw Sonic get its most successful entry in both sales and critical acclaim for what feels like forever, even boosting Sega financials for Q3 of this calendar year. As someone who has known Alex for near a decade, if he's not banging on about Final Fantasy IX, he is talking of Sonic. And there's a good reason for why Sonic is a close part of his life, as he gets into. It may not be his favourite game of the year per se, as he said, but the reason he talks of Mania so passionately is obvious, as you're about to hear.
Now, when I was a kid, I was an enormous Sonic the Hedgehog fan. As far as I was concerned, Sonic was the pinnacle of video games. It was the best that video games could be. It was cool, it ran in an awesome way, the music was brilliant and funky and cool, and the game looked brilliant, and the characters were great, and yeah, when you're 7, Sonic is pretty cool. But it's been a rough, long time, a rough decade or two for Sonic, where the games have ranged from middling to some of the worst games ever made, and it's been a real rough time. But Sonic Mania is Sega understanding, or somebody inside Sega at least, understanding at long last what it was that made Sonic special in the first place. It is a fabulous combination of new ideas with a mingling of every single one of the old Sonic games, a little bit borrowed from each of them, to create this really special new sequel package that does feel like what would have happened if they'd made a Sonic the Hedgehog 4 or 5, depending on how you want to count it, for the Sega Saturn at the time, instead of beginning to experiment with 3D Sonic games. It's weird, of course, that Sega have accomplished this through fans. The guys who made this game began their careers reverse engineering classic Sonic games in emulators and hacking them and editing them and rebuilding new versions of the Sonic engine in order to create their own sequels. And now, they've made their own sequel with Sega. That's actually one of the most charming things about the game, in a sense. It's that these guys have lived the dream, and not only have they lived the dream to make the game they dreamed of making with the company officially, but also they've made it as one of the best Sonic games ever made. They've made it as the best one critically and commercially for like 2 decades, and that is really, really impressive and a really charming story in and of itself. I've always been a big proponent for how video game communities can turn into something special, and Sonic Mania, it turned into an amazing game. It's got an incredible soundtrack, some great level design, a decent selection of classic and all new Sonic levels all mixed together. Of course, it has its flaws. It's got some of the most ambitious boss design in the Sonic series, but some of that doesn't quite come off as well as it could. The plot is a little bit unclear because it's quite an ambitious plot to be told with just sprites and no text and no talking. And they try and it doesn't quite get to where it needs to get to, but really none of that matters. It's a Sonic game that plays like a classic Sonic game, feels great, runs smooth, and it just takes you right back. It feels like you are playing a classic Mega Drive game or a Saturn game in the 90s. And that's the really impressive thing. Sonic has been in a rough place for a long time, and despite the fact that even this year there's been another 3D stinker of a Sonic game, that can't detract from how amazing Sonic Mania is. As a revival of a classic game, which is something we're going to be seeing a lot of and have seen a lot of in recent years, Sonic Mania is about as good as they come.
go off the rails. Don't you know it's time to raise our sails? It's freedom like you never knew. Don't need bags or a pass. Say the word, I'll be there in a flash. You could say my hat is off to you. Oh, we can zoom all the way to the moon from this great wide wacky world. Jump with me, grab coins with me, oh yeah. It's time to jump up in the air. Jump up, don't be scared. Jump up and your cares will soar away. And if the dark clouds start to swirl, don't feel a shed a tear, 'cause I'll be your one-up girl. So let's all jump up super high, high up in the sky. There's no power up like dancing. You know that you're my superstar. No one else can take me this far. I'm flipping the switch. Get ready for this, so let's do the Odyssey. Odyssey, yes, see. 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 Odyssey, Odyssey.
I wasn't as enamored with Mario Odyssey as everyone else. Now that's not to say it's a disappointing game. Far, far from it. I just prefer, to be honest, the first two Galaxy games over it, especially one. That being said, Super Mario Odyssey has some of the best game design in a game in a long, long time. With the final 90 minutes I spent with it before finishing just spellbinding. And that level in Nidoing City is just, oh, what can be said? Incredible design, and it's pure Nintendo game design at its most distilled and pure. I may not have been as taken with Super Mario Odyssey as everyone else was, but make no mistake, this is still in the top 3 reasons to get a Switch right now. The other big one we'll get into at the end. For now, here's X Games Journal turned comics bod Dave Cook to tell you all of Mario Odyssey as his favourite game of this year.
Now you've got panache, oh, let's do the Odyssey. It's time to jump up in the air. Jump up, don't be scared. Jump up and your cares will soar away. And if the dark clouds start to swirl, don't fear, don't shed a tear, 'cause I'll be your one-up girl. Now listen, all you boys and girls all around the world, don't be afraid to get up and move. You know that we're all superstars. We're the ones who made it this far. Put a smile on that face. There's no time to waste, so let's do the Odyssey.
Hi there, my name's Dave Cook. I am founder of Card Shark Comics, a comic publisher in Edinburgh, Scotland. And my favourite game of 2017 is Super Mario Odyssey. It's probably the first Mario game, new Mario game I've actually played in quite a while, to be honest. But I have to say, it just made me feel so nostalgic playing a brand new Mario adventure with lots of cool like powers through Cappy, which is just a genius mechanic. You know, the ability to jump into any sort of bad guy or object. And just sort of see what cool and interesting things you could do. I love just the nostalgic feeling of it, you know, those 2D sections where the perspective kind of flips, and then you sort of play old school Mario for a bit. I also like the worlds. I just found that yes, the worlds were kind of uncanny in places. I mean, New Donk City is kind of like New York, and there's lots of real-looking humans walking around, which is a bit weird. But I thought it was quite interesting direction for the series, where, you know, had they just done the Mushroom Kingdom again, we would have seen all that before, you know. So I thought it was quite a brave decision to sort of make it in this weird kind of real planet Earth, but not really kind of setting. You know, and one of the things, it just does this amazing thing where you're getting power moons quite regularly, so you're always feeling like you're collecting things and earning things and being rewarded, and just the pace of that is so perfect. And it becomes this really addictive thing where you just want to collect them all. I spent a lot of time sort of, you know, trudging across the map, just trying to find new power moons or just like clues to help me find other ones. And I have heard a lot of criticisms about the game where people say it's not that difficult, and I kind of agree to a point. I don't think it detracted at all from my enjoyment of it. And if you really want a big challenge, you know, all the end game stuff is there, and some of those challenge rooms at the end are really, really difficult. And, you know, proper test the skill, you know, all the sort of skills that you've learned along the way. And if, you know, it really demands that you perfect things like the triple jump and the sort of cappy jump and all that. So the skillful portion is there if you want it. But overall, I just felt it was just a joyful, nostalgic, really fun, really sweet, just a great, colourful experience. And I think it's a good showcase for the Switch, which it was actually the first game I got for the Switch, and the second game I got was Zelda. So I started Mario first, and instantly I just thought, this is great. This is such a great rebound for Nintendo after the Wii U kind of, you know, had a lukewarm reception. So it's really nice to see Nintendo still has that spark where when it really knocks out of the park, it really, you know, it creates system sellers, which is, you know, kind of like what they were like back in the day. All of their big first party titles were system sellers, you know. And, you know, it's just great to see that they haven't lost that sort of penchant for great level design. Some of the level design in the challenge rooms, especially in Odyssey, are just so well crafted. And yeah, it just amazes me like how much they keep on innovating the sort of Mario template. And I think it was 3D Mario World or Land on the Wii U, where every level had a different gimmick pretty much, and it's just astounding how the sheer imagination on show in these games when it comes to the mechanics and design, which is just amazing to see that hasn't been lost over the years. And is still strong in Mario Odyssey. So yeah, that's by far my favourite game of the year. Probably would have been Zelda, because I've played a bit more of that now, and I think that has elevated past Mario. But yeah, I've got to give it to Mario because I've played that most.
Chance they came upon a devil's game, and gosh, they paid the price. Paid the price. And now they're fighting for their lives on a mission fraught with dread. And if they proceed but don't succeed, well, the devil will take their heads.
Before we move into our last game and get ready, because this game in particular will be long, we have some honorable mentions to get through from a couple of guests who have been in this special. First, here's Dave Cook.
Honourable mentions, I think my first one would have to be Neo from Tecmo Koei and Team Ninja. And as far as these Souls-like Dark Souls imitators go, it's right up there. I think it actually stands proud with the core series to a point. You know, and I remember playing the beta just thinking, yeah, this is cool, but there's not a lot of depth here. And I think it's a shame because the beta doesn't really give you even like a percentage of the customization that the full game offers. Customization over your combo strings, over your weapons, your skills, your sort of ninjutsu skills. It's just so much going on in that game. And the challenges there, the combat is slick. It's a great hack and slash, and it sort of scratches the itch for games like Onimusha, which I really miss. I hope Capcom brings that back one day, but Neo really satisfied that sort of you know, feudal Japan with demon sort of trope, I guess. So yeah, Neo's great. The back half of that game is just brutally, like, so savage, and I love the challenge. I died often, but I loved it. And then next I'd say is Nier Automata, which you know, Platinum Games is one of my favourite developers of all time. And my first instinct was this is Bayonetta, but it's open world with robots, which is like the perfect elevator pitch. But no, over time it sort of revealed itself to be a lot more than that. You had the sort of bullet hell shmup sections with the sort of flying rigs. You also had things like the hacking mini games, all these little quirky little diversions and sort of spins on the sort of template. And of course, when you completed it over and over, oh man, that story just got so deep and so intricate and emotional, and it's one of the best plots I've played this year, if not the best. Yeah, it just really sort of said a lot about the nature of what it means to be human, and you know, can robots feel and this kind of thing. So yeah, absolutely brilliant. And then last honourable mention is Cuphead, which, I mean, off the bat, it's so great to see a small team like that, with Microsoft's backing, of course, make something so great. And it's a real labour of love, and you can tell through every bit of hand-drawn animation, the quirky sort of retro soundtrack, the tight gameplay, which just it's basically really scratched the itch I have for a new Contra game, which, you know, Konami aren't going to make anytime soon. So I'll settle for Cuphead. I mean, it's great. It's absolutely fantastic. It also plays a bit like Alien Soldier, the old Treasure game, where essentially it's a boss rush, and I love that sort of grueling challenge kind of thing. So every boss was so unique, the powers were great, the sort of attack memorization, you know, the patterns you have to sort of learn from the bosses just reminded me of Dark Souls, which is, again, I've talked about Dark Souls a lot, but that's my favourite series, so I think all these games have that sort of brutal sort of difficulty edge to them, apart from Mario, of course. But yeah, Cuphead just looks phenomenal. I think it's a great win for the indie scene as a whole. I would love to see what these guys do next, and I just wish them all the success in the world.
Next, 2 Season 5 guests. First up, Alex Hutchinson, and then Nell Sanderson.
Also, I love What Remains of Edith Finch. It's an interactive experience, an exploration of an idea that didn't outstay its welcome, had a few very clever ideas that used its interactivity to get its point across in a way that wouldn't be possible in other media. So in the genre of sort of walking simulators, which has grown in popularity recently, I thought it was a far superior offering. Another game I really loved was Super Mario Odyssey. It's the first game that I've loved since Sunshine, and if you don't like Sunshine, then I think you may have no soul. But it's full of exploration, joy and discovery. It's constantly rewarding you for clever use of its mechanics. And it's a joyful and positive and bright way to spend the winter months while your kids or friends have monopolized your television.
If I had to pick some follow-ups, some honorable mentions, it would be Night in the Woods, for its incredible sense of place and a wonderfully unique voice. Dishonored 2, Death of the Outsider, of course, for being not only an excellent standalone expansion, just in and of itself of being more good Dishonored, but Arcane also changed just enough about its base mechanics that I approached the entirety of it in a completely new way compared to how I played both Dishonored and Dishonored 2. It's also really very excellent. And then, of course, like everyone else in the world who plays video games. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey are both unbelievable accomplishments that demonstrate just what an amazing breadth of design and creativity that Nintendo possesses. Like, one of those games manages to be broad and unlike any of its other predecessors, but also still very familiar. And then Mario Odyssey is just a joy that somehow manages to capture like over 30 years of just kind of what that series means to people. I'm not really one who's struck with nostalgia for many things generally, but there were moments in Mario Odyssey where it's just like eyes open, really did have one of those like feel like a kid again moments that are very, very rare for me. So yeah, those are the games that I loved. Well, I mean, there are tons of others I loved, but those are the games that I was left thinking about the most in 2017.
Finally, a few more guests with a few audible mentions of their own who are still yet to discuss their favourite game, although you'll hear that in a minute. First, No Goblins, Dan Teasdale.
I do, however, have to give my runner-up credit to Yakuza 0, which is best described as Shenmue but good, which I know is going to annoy a lot of people, but it's a game where you go through and you have a ton of fun and you can hire a chicken to run your real estate empire, and it's just a whole bunch of goofs that piled into a game that tells a serious story, but it's also incredibly hilarious. And it is so good that after playing Yakuza 0, I am now committed to playing through the previous 5, 6, however many Yakuza games there are, just because it created such a great experience of being in a world and not being self-serious about it that I fell in love with it.
This is Matthew Reynolds, and my honourable mentions for Game of the Year would be Super Mario Odyssey, which I think is an absolutely wonderful Mario game, but it has a few, if I was going to be nitpicky, a few structural things that I'm not totally sold on, but as a game to just simply play, it's pretty great. What Remains of Edith Finch, which is a game I implore you to go in completely blind, don't read anything about it, and you can do that hopefully quite easily because it's like 3 hours, so you can just knock it out in an evening before you read some sort of spoilerific tweet, whatever it might be. PUBG, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, has just been a really great multiplayer experience that I've just dipped in and out of all year. And Resident Evil 7, because I think it delivers what a Resident Evil game like should be, while giving the series that kind of refresh it desperately needed. You know, new characters, new perspective, new setting, and I think it's probably missed out on a few Game of the Year lists just because it was released right at the start of the year, but it is still very good.
Hello, my name is Andrew Smith from Spilt Milk Studios. So I have to say as well, a special mention has to go to Mario Odyssey, and in a year where we've had just some of the best games of all time, I think Mario Odyssey particularly is quite astonishing. I really enjoyed playing it through, and then I got to the end, and then I really, really enjoyed playing through again. And then when you get to the actual end, it made me think about the relationship between games developers and Nintendo and Mario and what they mean to the world of entertainment, and the fact that they kind of made Mario Odyssey as a study of not just a trip around the world or a trip around as a tourist, but as something more, something deeper, something about memories and what we've shared with Nintendo and Mario and what that means. I also want to give a shout out to What Remains of Edith Finch, which is just stunning, brilliant, fantastic, quietly excellent game that really had me close to tears many times, and I don't mean that in an exploitative manner, I mean that it earned it.
And for the sake of it, here's my honourable mentions involving games not mentioned at all in this episode yet. Mainly because the rest of my top 10 games of this year have actually gotten their own parts in the show. Anyways. There's an argument to be made that Splatoon 2 feels a lot more like Splatoon 1.5. And in some aspects there's probably a grain of truth to that statement. But despite that, Splatoon 2 is just as fun as the first game. I've played more of the single player than I did for the first game, and still, Splatoon 2's placing on this list is mainly because of its multiplayer. And let me make clear, every other game on my top 10 list for this year, despite having some sort of multiplayer component, is because of its single player. So EA can fuck up about the demand of single player in games. Plus, the new addition of Salmon Run as a co-op mode helps what is already a great game. If you need one other reason to buy a Switch, Splatoon 2 is definitely it. Persona 5 is a fantastic game. It has style and flair that very little games possess. It's a game that has some of the best set of characters in an RPG in recent years. Its soundtrack from Shoji Meguro is just fantastic. And a turn-based battle system that, speaking for myself, doesn't bore me half to death. So why do I find myself, in a way, disappointed with Persona 5? After the longest wait for it, and after so many years being excited for it, having Persona 4 Golden as one of my favourite games ever, it comes down to two things which both tie into one another. One, the older I get, I don't necessarily want to spend more than 50 hours playing a game. Once I reach 50 hours, I'm ready for that game to end, no matter how amazing it is. Which brings me to two, which Persona 5 is majorly complicit of. By needlessly and unnecessarily stretching and padding out the last 20 hours or so I had playing it, it near killed any enthusiasm I had to finish it. When I did finish Persona 5, my playtime came in at around 75 hours. 5 years after Persona 4 Golden became one of my favourite games of all time, there was a lot of expectation on Persona 5 to deliver for me. And let me make it clear, while it is still an incredible game to the point I'd still have it in my top 10 for the year, it's an incredible game for 50 hours. After that, it goes downhill into a near train wreck. Knowing the quality of Team Persona and Atlus, this should not have been a thing that happened in the first place. By right, this is a game that shouldn't really exist. A prequel wasn't necessary to Chloe Price's story and her relationship with Rachel Amber. Even now the game is fully done, it still feels like that maybe it shouldn't have existed. But, with that caveat aside, for its first attempt at a narrative game, Deck 9 Games in Colorado delivered in a massive way its telling of the two's relationship and providing closure to the Max, Chloe, Rachel saga. And as of recording this, there's still a farewell episode for the Deluxe Edition owners featuring Max and Chloe, but in the context of the main story, That's it. Life is Strange Before the Storm delivered a relationship that was heartbreaking and wholesome in regards to Chloe and Rachel. But more importantly, it felt real. Moments like the play, the train bunking off Skull help add to that, as does the ending, without going into any more details. Rihanna DeVries did justice to the character and was the closest thing to Ashley Birch taking up the mantle again for the main game. UK band Daughter also provide an incredibly well made soundtrack for the game that aptly sums up the game's tone as a whole. In total, I think Deck 9 pulled it off. The skepticism met by fans for the game was rightfully placed for a prequel that wasn't, and even in my opinion is arguable, still isn't, needed in the first place. But for what they were given, they actually pulled it off. Big time. I'd love to see them get their own Life is Strange series outside any other established canon in the world of Life is Strange, and have them build off this as a jumping point, and have two studios with Don't Nod and Deck 9 making their own games. Either way, for its first narrative game, Deck 9 did fantastic, and did Life is Strange justice. The fact that we got an Uncharted game with no Nathan Drake as a lead, but instead the return of Chloe Fraser and Uncharted 4 co-antagonist Nadine Ross was something that is worth celebrating. Not only because of the fact an action game had a duo with personality and trust walls between the two that get worked out during the game, but like Life is Strange Before the Storm, a partnership that actually feels real. I actually prefer Uncharted The Lost Legacy a lot more than A Thief's End on that alone. Claudia Black and Laura Bailey's performances as both characters are just standout and help enhance each other's characters. But from a gameplay perspective, even that feels somewhat varied, and for the better. The game's puzzles are some of the best in the series. Some set pieces are on par with the best in the series. The last section of the game alone easily jumps into the top 3 of the series, alongside the Tibetan Hotel in Uncharted 2 and Madagascar in Uncharted 4. The exploration of the entire jungle and even its quiet moments are just something wonderful. Consider that this was a £25 or $40 boxed game. I got a lot out of my money's worth from it, and then some. And it also shows that you don't have to pay over your arse for fascinating and incredible single player AAA games. The fact this came from Naughty Dog as well? No excuses, publishers. Finally, how is it possible that a Dutch developer can go from its previous MO of first-person shooters with Killzone, most of which were mediocre at best and shite at worst, with the exception of Killzone 2, I'll fight anyone who says otherwise in that game and I'll die on that hill if I have to making not only one of the best RPGs of the year, but of the generation so far. For switching from an FPS to an RPG and coming out of its comfort zone, Guerrilla Games easily deserves recognition for that alone, but it also managed to deliver an RPG in Horizon Zero Dawn that is just breathtaking, not only to see, but to play as well. A combat system that is just incredibly surprisingly fun to play and very deep as well. You'd expect that from a competent RPG, obviously, but maybe the fact I find this so successful, despite all the indications pre-release this game would be a home run anyways, is because Guerrilla managed to create something so outside its comfort zone first time round. Now that's not to say there's not flaws with Horizon, but to get it near perfect the first time is worth applauding in a massive way. Having Aloy as its main central character is also a watershed moment for games as well, or at least feels like it for sure. Here they made a strong, badass character who's not a damsel in distress, not sexualized, and is front and center to everything the game is. Ashley Burch's performance as Aloy makes it the best acting performance of any game this year and helps elevate the character even more to great heights in a fascinating and interesting story that had me curious to how everything played out in the world before the blackout and how Operation Zero Dawn came to be. And yet somehow Guerrilla managed to find time after the release of the game to not only announce at E3, but then release within the same calendar year the expansion, The Frozen Wilds, which helps elevate the game's experience even more. The fact Guerrilla was working on this just as the main game was coming out, and then have it come out within the same calendar year, is nothing short of impressive. In fact, Guerrilla making the game look as incredible as it did is the only non-surprise here. Say what you will about the Killzone games, but they at least looked incredible. Boring, but incredibly good looking boring games. With Horizon that's not a shocker, but a post-apocalyptic game with not the tropey drab and brown, drowned out melancholy look of the world, but with colour and natural life and plantation coming out the wazoo, is a breath of fresh air. Its art design is something that should be taken note of. For its first non-FPS, for the first game in a brand new IP, and for establishing a successful franchise in its first game alone, Guerrilla should and deservedly can take applause for what it did. It stuck the landing, bowed, did a curtsy and twirl before coming to a complete stop on the first game and subsequent DLC story expansion. Imagine what it'll be like when Horizon 2 comes out on PlayStation 5 then. Alright, I lied when I said we'd get into our last big game after honorable mentions. But this is still worth putting in. Earlier this year, Fulbright released its second game, Tacoma, on PC and Xbox One. It was a game a lot of people, myself included actually, enjoyed. One of the key figures behind its development is a Season 5 guest, and actually someone you heard during last year's MFG Goody Special evangelized The Last Guardian as their favourite game of the year, along with me. Here, Fulbright's Steve Gaynor, who will be the season premiere of Season 5 when that comes out, talks of his favourite games of the year. Yes, plural. And I'm letting it count, mostly because what he talks about may surprise anyone expecting the norm. It did for me when I got his contribution.
Hi there, I'm Steve Gaynor from Fulbright, the creators of Gone Home and Tacoma, and my favorite game of 2017 is a tie. I'm going to mention two games, but they're both short and they're both free. so I'll allow it. The first game I'm going to mention is packing up the rest of your stuff on the last day at your old apartment, or from here on out just referred to as packing up, which is by Turnfollow, a two-person team of indie developers who also made a game called Little Party, and they make player-driven kind of contemplative story games that are small and personal and really nice to look at. So, I mean, if you know the games I've worked on, then I guess it makes sense why I'm into what Turnfollow does. But Packing Up is a really interesting experiment that also feels very polished and put together in practice. But the experiment is, what if you took the inventory Tetris mechanic from Resident Evil 4, basically, and turned it into A, the core mechanic of a small game, and B, a storytelling device. So the premise of the game is you're in your last day at your old apartment while you're moving out, and you just have to go around the apartment and gather up items, and then place them into boxes so that they all fit, so that you can move your stuff out of your apartment before they kick you out. Not that there's like a time thing to it or whatever. It's just like, you know, you're packing up to move out, and you got to fit everything into the boxes you have, and so you pick up objects and rotate them and move them around and place them and stack them in these different boxes that you have, which is a fun little spatial puzzle in and of itself. But each object has a piece of text attached to it that describes kind of what the character's personal attachment to it is, or some memory that they have having to do with where they got that item, or the role it's had in their life in the apartment, or just some little observation. So it has something to do with that short story, the things they carried, which it's really about finding out about this person and the point they're at in their life, which is a very familiar point, I think, in a lot of people's lives, that kind of moving out of one of your semi-crappy college apartments, but you lived there at a formative time in your life, and you have these nostalgic attachments to the place and what's in it, and finding out about that person through the things that they have and the things that you touch, and through this kind of almost ritualistic action of picking these things up and putting them in their proper place. And then it has this really polished, very kind of evocative, moving outro sequence that's surprising. The whole thing takes probably like 20 minutes to play. You can go to turnfollow.itch.io to download Packing Up and play it and have some feelings. It's my favorite game of 2017, much like Butterfly Soup, which is a visual novel by Brianna Leigh, which I hope I'm pronouncing right. It could be Lee, but Brianna is it's a one person dev team. It's a solo creation, and it's a visual novel that was written, designed, programmed, and all the art was done by Brianna. And it's a very personal game in a very different way, which is it's a classic story forward visual novel. It kind of reminds you of like a Western visual novel in the realm of Dream Daddy, but it's specifically about a bunch of queer Asian high school girls that are all really into baseball. And so that's the pitch. Is like it's clearly about the creator's obsessions, or as she put it, she made this game to put something on the screen because nobody else is going to, which is like classic kind of primal reason to make something good. And the game is just funny as hell. It's really, really well written. It's not like a highly systemic or interaction-driven game. You're mostly progressing through the dialogue and seeing what's going to happen in the story. And in a lot of cases, that's not the kind of game that I'm really into. But the characters are so interesting and funny and endearing, and the things that happen are both just sort of like small and familiar, but also surprising and weird. It's one of the best written games that I've played in a really, really long time, and you really fall in love with the characters and how goofy they are, but how kind of meaningful the things that are happening to them are. And I can't recommend it enough. With both of these games, they're available on itch. They're fantastic. They're free. You can opt to leave a tip for the creators. If you pay more than $5 for Butterfly Soup, you get a really nice digital art book that includes a bunch of development notes as well from Brianna, which is really interesting. So my favorite game of 2017 is Butterfly Soup and Packing Up, and you should play them both. I'm Steve Gaynor. Thanks for having me, and here's to a great 2018 for you and yours. Bye!
In 1998, Nintendo changed the landscape of gaming in a seismic way. Since 1987, the Legend of Zelda series has been one of the Big N's biggest key franchises. But the release in 1998 of Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64 provided one of the greatest games of all time. It is to this day the highest rated game on Metacritic, on top or near top most greatest game ever lists, and has defined and inspired many games since. To the point that Rockstar co-founder and head writer Dan Houser even once famously said in an interview with the New York Times in 2012 during a preview cycle for Grand Theft Auto 5 that anyone who makes 3D games who says they've not borrowed something from Mario or Zelda on the Nintendo 64 is lying. Ocarina of Time is, needless to say, a very popular game and one of the consensus best games of all time no matter what. And yet we've still not had it on my favourite game in its near 4 years of existence. Or maybe we will for Season 5. Stay tuned. And after nearly 20 years, it is still as iconic as it was then, and it is the best Zelda game of all time. Actually, let me correct myself in that last bit. Was the best Zelda game of all time.
Open your eyes.
Alright, You knew this was coming, and believe you me, I was expecting a few people to talk of this game for my favourite game of 2017, but not this many. It does speak, however, of just how incredibly popular and special Breath of the Wild is as a game, that it is not only the consensus game of the year, but is now considered one of the greatest games of all time on a consensus level, less than a year after it came out. For a series like Zelda, I'd played a combined less than 10 hours, maybe less, with other games in the series. With that in mind, I was super interested with Breath of the Wild the more and more I seen it pre-released than any other Zelda game. Over 50 hours and a week post Switch launch later, Breath of the Wild showed why gaming is a form of entertainment like no other. It's kind of hard to describe why Breath of the Wild works in the way it does. Not because I don't want to spoil it, but in terms of trying to process what makes Breath of the Wild so special. The fact that it's the first Zelda game that truly embraces an open world philosophy is one key component to that. But once you leave the opening plateau, the possibilities are endless. There's stories everywhere in the world that you could go and listen to. Quests outside the main story to be done, shrines to be beat, Korok seeds to be found. All that before you even start approaching the story head on properly. That's not to mention the possibility of mismatching certain gameplay mechanics and systems. Times where I'd done things in the game where I said out loud, "You can do this with that?" Or "Fuck! That is doable by doing this," or seen YouTube videos with similar tricks and just thought, "Holy fuck!" While I won't go as far as to say it's actually now one of my favourite games ever, the fact that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is now one of the best games of all time on a consensus level, less than a year after its release, is certainly well earned. To kick off our Breath of the Wild party, here's Greenland Content VP and former Eurogamer Editor-in-Chief Tom Bramwell to talk of it as not only his favourite game of the year, but one of his favourite games of all time.
Hi, my name's Tom Bramwell, and my game of 2017 is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild! Woo! So I need to begin this by saying apologies to Jonathan Cullen. I've done this twice before, on both occasions. I've written a nice script, and then I've sat in front of a microphone and tried my best to sound like I'm on Radio 4, doing the shipping forecast. But actually, what it tends to sound like, I think, is an old man who's locked himself in his shed trying to catch the attention of a nearby dog walker or something like that. But I've got a blue Snowball microphone this year, so hopefully the audio quality will be better. You may also notice that I'm not particularly scripted. This is the second thing I need to apologise to Johnny for, which is that I have absolutely no time left in my year due to kids and family and people going to hospitals over the last few weeks. Everyone's fine. Work being insane, and I keep saying yes to things when I should probably say no to them.
With all due respect and love for my friend Tom, is this what Voss meant in Far Cry 3 when he asked what the definition of insanity was?
But I wanted to do this because Johnny's my man, and also because The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is genuinely my game of the year, and probably my game of really quite a long time. If I was putting together like a top 5, top 10 list of games of all time, it would almost certainly be on there at this point. And it feels important to go into why that is. So let's break it down.
Sorry, continue.
I think the first thing I would say is that it reminded me of a phrase I haven't heard for a long time, which was killer application. Now, we used to talk about killer apps all the time back in like 15, 20 years ago when I started writing about games, and we were talking about new consoles and, you know, why people would buy them, and everyone was always talking about, you know, what's the killer app? And a killer app is simply a game that is so good that you would buy a console to play it. But that definition, I think, also doesn't really cover it. It's also it's kind of important that the game feels like it couldn't exist without the console, and vice versa. And I think The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is probably the truest example of that I've seen in several generations. You know, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, neither of them really had a killer application. I'm not sure that PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 particularly did, so it's been a while since it's been a relevant thing. But Breath of the Wild truly is that. You know, it's the sort of free-ranging, free-roaming game to match a free-roaming console. And I think, you know, the times when I've most enjoyed playing this game in the last 12 months, or 9 months, or however fucking long it's been available, have been away from my home, which is kind of incredible, really, to play a game of this scope and depth and imagination away from, you know, your big screen TV. I played it for probably 4 hours, 5 hours straight in an international departure lounge in JFK Airport in New York in June, sat opposite the most angry looking teenage kid I have ever seen, who just had like a magazine or a book or something, and he knew what I was doing, and it was glorious. And you know, so apart from being able to make children feel bad in public, it was just, you know, it eats time because you just roam around exploring. And it's the first time I've played a Zelda game in a long time where I felt like I am exploring. I'm not just going through the rituals. I'm not just waiting for the boomerang or the hook shot or something to turn up. I'm actually going out and finding things. And I love the way that it dispenses with the traditions of Zelda. You know, it kind of almost discards them in front of you to demonstrate that they're not that important anymore and that you need to change the way you think about what you're doing. I love probably the world more than anything, because you can just pick a location on the map that doesn't have much writing on it yet, which indicates you haven't been there, and just head off in that direction and you'll find interesting things. And, you know, if you ask me what those interesting things were, I'd be like, I don't know, because there'll be cute little things that I'll discover. There'll be a shrine hidden somewhere behind a particularly interesting puzzle, or there'll be I'll discover some interaction in the world that I haven't seen before. Like, someone told me yesterday that you can feed the fish and that they have particular food that they like. I mean, like what? Like who? And apparently, you know those icy things that sort of suck you towards them, those little squid things? Apparently if you put a rusty sword, you throw a rusty sword at them, they swallow it and they spit it out, and it's a brand new sword that's been cleaned. I mean, it's brilliant. I love it. And I don't think I think we've got to the point now where we see open world games so frequently, and they often pop up with the same regularity as like annual sports franchises. And so the you know, depth of creativity and the attention to detail is not the same. But a game like Zelda is you know, Breath of the Wild is actually, it reminds me of the best Grand Theft Autos, where even months or years later you're still discovering things that the developers spent absolutely ages crafting that are kind of there if you have the attention to look for them. Anyway, I need to go and write some features, so I'm really sorry, Johnny, that this isn't better. But Zelda Breath of the Wild is absolutely my game of the year. It is the first time in a long time I felt like a game completely justified buying a console. I literally spent £300 or whatever it was to play this, and I felt like it was worth every penny. I bought an Anker mobile recharger so that I could continue playing it on long haul, regardless of whether my battery ran out. And I'm still playing it now. Every so often I pick it up and I just go and find a bit of the map that I haven't looked at yet, and I go and play around there. The DLC I haven't really explored, but I've told sort of mixed things. But it's, you know, it's got a motorbike, so what's not to love? Anyway, Zelda Breath of the Wild, absolutely my game of the year. If you haven't played it, please find a way to play it. I think the Wii U version is actually very good. Yeah, that's it. I don't have a wonderful scripted outro, except to say, of course, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, whatever it is that you do. I hope that your Christmas is less stressful than mine. Bye-bye.
Hello, my name is Andrew Smith from Spilt Milk Studios, and my favourite game of 2017 is Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's probably no surprise to anyone who knows me or, you know, plays video games that this year Legend of Zelda was just absolutely astonishing accomplishment. I think to paint the proper picture of why I love it so much and why I think it's not really just Game of the Year, it's probably Game of the Decade. At the very least, it's to sort of go back to how I, came across it. So before it was announced, or rather before it was released, I specifically avoided any spoilers or even any trailers. To be honest, I am a huge fan of Zelda, and I was pretty much guaranteed to buy it day one. So there was not much point in me worrying too much about what new features there are and all that kind of thing. So I came into it quite blind, and I actually first played it straight after a very, very hectic weekend in Newcastle at a very good friend of mine's stag do. Now, I picked up my Switch from the office where it had been delivered on the way home. I was exhausted. I had to move my television into my room because the flat share that we were having had guests over and this, that and the other. And so I ended up in what kind of accidentally was a sort of very reminiscent of how I used to play games when I was a kid. I mean, maybe not hungover, but certainly camped up in my room on my bed. I should mention as well, my girlfriend was away for that day and that evening, so it was very much on my own. I got some food and drink, and I booted up this Switch, and I booted up this game, and my breath was completely taken away. From the very first moment to the very last, something like 90 hours later. I mean, I rinsed that game. Every single moment was a joy. It was actually it's quite hard to sort of overstate, I think, or exaggerate how good it is, because it does everything with such kind of verve and aplomb and polish and confidence that things that you would normally just be celebrating in a game are just like one small part of this incredible package. People seem to think that it was taking inspiration from games like Far Cry or Metal Gear or anything, survival games, kind of the big trend. But then you kind of realise that actually this game's been in development for, best part of 4 years. So certainly before quite a lot of those became particularly popular. And yet to introduce them to Zelda, the world of Zelda, and do such a consummate job of winding them into this incredible mythos that everyone loves to play every few years, it's staggering. As a game developer, knowing just how hard it is to make a game about one mechanic and to make that feel, satisfying and exciting, and to introduce new methods and new sort of concepts around that one mechanic every few levels is, it's tough. And these guys, the guys at Nintendo and the girls, have been doing that for like every single element of this game, and then to also have the confidence to do that in a series that's so beloved. There's obviously a lot of people who are really excited to think that, perhaps Zelda's going to be a little bit more fresh this time, a little bit more interesting than the normal Zelda kind of template. But I don't think anyone predicted it would be so wildly different. I mean, just everything about the game, from the basic mechanics to all the wonderful new tools and the toys that you get to play with, and even down to the story, as simple as it is. I think it's really well told and excellently paced, and woven throughout the whole experience really, really well. But the thing that stood out for me was the world building, and I mean that in two senses. So one is this dead sort of post-apocalyptic Hyrule that you're exploring. You know, this place has been destroyed, and then nature has taken over, and you're just exploring this world that's kind of just coming back from sort of the bitter taste of defeat, and you're this hero who maybe was the guy who kind of caused it, but on the other side, you know, there's just the sense of it being a real place, and I think that's where it comes down to for me. I mean, Breath of the Wild, it's right there in the name, we should have known, but the reason I used to play these kinds of games was to escape into another world, and never before have I escaped so thoroughly or felt so completely absorbed in a world. And it's from, you know, it's from the flora and fauna, are kind of like the stars of the show, the weather, the sunsets and the sunrises, the chill that you get if you climb up a mountain, the rainfall, and the fact that the once kind of crucial almost musical themes just sit in the back. You know, some wonderful compositions, but just piano, gently stirring, incredibly emotional, and honestly, it's just an astonishing thing, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. It's one of those games that, much like Mario 64 when I first played that, really has opened my eyes up to what we can do as an industry. The feelings that I felt playing Zelda were not, you know, necessarily sadness when the sad thing happens, or excitement when the fight's going my way or whatever, but it was more just a feeling of existing in a world that they've created, and feeling like it had rules that I could play with and explore and touch and prod, and that it would always react in a way that surprised me or excited me. And I think that's basically the best thing you can do with games or with entertainment, really. So yeah, Breath of the Wild is my game of the year 2017.
You think we're done? Not even close. There's more Zelda loving to come. Here's Matthew Reynolds of Eurogamer to keep this party going. Because there ain't no party like a Zelda party. Nah! Won't stop. Nah! Can't stop. Dear God, what have I just done?
Hi, hello there, I'm Matthew Reynolds, and my favourite game of 2017 is Zelda Breath of the Wild. This probably doesn't come as much of a surprise to you, as it's obviously a very popular game this year. And also, if you had said to me at the start of the year this was my choice, I probably wouldn't have been surprised either, because Zelda games are very good, and this is one I've been quite looking forward to. I really like it because it's both very good and very interesting, which are obviously the key components of any Game of the Year candidate. But in particular, I think it's interesting because it delivers. Not only does it re-evaluate what it means to be a Zelda game, while still very much being a Zelda game, it also has looked at the rest of the industry and what it's doing in terms of open world games. So it's whether it's like role-playing games like Skyrim, or The Witcher, or action games that Ubisoft puts out every year, like Assassin's Creed or whatever it might be. And it kind of combines those two kind of like role-playing games and those kind of action games together, but it kind of takes all the wheat and has none of the chaff that those games have. And I suppose an example of this, and this is something we talk about, or at least I talk about in the kind of our Game of the Year chat at Eurogamer, is there's just less stuff to do, and I think that's a really good thing. So for example, Skyrim has all kinds of different classes to choose from when you create your character, and when you are playing the game, then that character has tons of upgrades to consider. And then as you're exploring, there's loads of books to find and read, and weapons to try out, and spells to kind of conjure up, and all kinds of systems to craft things, and stuff to obsess over and choose between. And while having loads of choices is all well and good, not all of it always sits together neatly, or can be particularly well executed. Even though I don't know, I might be in a minority, but I suspect a lot of people will be like this, but I could play Skyrim a dozen times and not touch a bunch of stuff at all. And that's not because Skyrim has loads to do, it's because I personally prefer to play a certain way. And even though the kind of the range of things to do, or the palette, is smaller in Breath of the Wild, I feel like I've touched every single system that game has to offer, and they all work wonderfully, both in isolation and together, which I think open world games really do well. So to talk about some of the systems that Zelda does for the first time for the series, or that other open world games do, is like runes, which I think runes are nigh on perfectly implemented. They feel really accessible, infinitely kind of replayable, and you can just kind of mess around them all kinds of interesting ways. They're introduced really early on in the game to kind of like, give you the idea that like these are an essential tool. And yet they're not ever confusing, despite kind of what you could do with them, or you overused in both the shrines and in the overworld. And you often actually forget that they were in your arsenal, which I think is probably a real strength, just because it just then feels like it's a tool, like I don't know, like an item, a consumable item, or a weapon that you just have on you, and not something that you feel like you have to rely on constantly. And despite being them being very powerful and very unique to this game. And then there is weapon scarcity and breaking weapons, which has been proven very controversial for this game, but I think is actually a very, very good system, just because where it sits compared to previous Zelda games. So previously you would enter a combat situation or see enemies ahead, and you would enter that combat situation, fight a bunch of enemies, or ignore it entirely, just run around them, and either way it doesn't make you necessarily any richer or poorer in terms of the items you have and you come out of it. Like for example, if you compare it to something like Final Fantasy or any kind of like, or even Skyrim, like there's no experience points gained, right? Whereas in Breath of the Wild, you have to make a decision that like, okay, if I enter this, into this camp, will clearing it break up a bunch of my weapons that I could use better elsewhere? But doing that, does that also mean that I get a more powerful sword, or do I get some elemental arrows that are kind of rare and help me in a very different situation that could be also very useful? Or you can just ignore combat as much as possible and not reap those benefits, but also keep the weapons that you do have. And I think if you just having that weighing up that consideration is just really, that just constantly as you're kind of like going through the world, is really enjoyable, and it's kind of something that sits at the back of your mind. And I think if you're savvy enough to pick and choose those opportunities that could have good rewards and come out on top, then that elevates combat to something that Zelda really hasn't had before. So those are a bunch of very specific things that make the game sing, and it's, not everything it does I think is like absolutely perfect, because no game is perfect. For example, I think shrines are great, but they can only really work for this one Zelda game, and it's a brilliant incentive to explore the world and kind of like play with some really great ideas in isolation. The idea of doing that again, in terms of like, here's another 120 or plus, including DLC mini puzzles, just seems a bit too much. And I think having those proper fleshed out dungeons from previous games and what Zelda's really known for, maybe a degree of gear gating to kind of glue in items that then allows you to open up more of the world elsewhere, even if it's just for side stuff, I think would be really welcome to see come back. And having kind of like the more open structure, really playful sandbox overworld combined with the traditional Zelda dungeon formula, I think would be the best of both worlds. But that is obviously a concern for future Zelda games. I think in isolation and Breath of the Wild, combines all these different ideas wonderfully. So yeah, that's it. Zelda is pretty great, so just get a Switch or dust off the Wii U, whatever you got, and do find time to play it, because it is really ace.
You've heard from a handful of people on why Breath of the Wild is their favourite game of this year, and even one of their favourite games ever. So it feels like a good place to end there. But before we go, there's one final contribution to not only Zelda, but this entire special. Here's New Goblin's Dan Teasdale to bring this shindig to a close.
Hi, I'm Dan Teasdale, and my #1 favorite game of 2017 is The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, as I suspect it may be for many other people on this audio presentation. So probably the best way to describe why Zelda had such an impact on me is through a story of my E3 experience in 2016. We were showing at E3 2016, and I used my exhibitor badge to basically cut the line in front of everyone at E3 to be one of the first people to play Breath of the Wild on the floor. And I played through it for half an hour, had a great time, and I remember having this conversation that night with Waypoint's Austin Walker, basically talking about this experience I had where I started the game and came out into sort of, huge expanse, went immediately to the right to the lake near the Temple of Time, dived in to get something in the middle, and then hit that sort of classic open world sandbox moment of I need to get from here to somewhere else, but the pacing of it wasn't right. Like it felt like every other sandbox game, like, okay, I guess I have to try through here to get onto like this critical path or this road or something like that. And I was chatting with Austin about it. I kind of mentioned that this is so weird having this very Nintendo experience not be paced perfectly like you'd expect from a Mario or a Zelda game where everything is just finely balanced. But at the same time, like, you can't really get that in a sandbox game, or so I thought. So, I pick up Breath of the Wild with my new Switch and play through and play it for over 100 hours, get completely addicted to it. But the thing that struck me about it was I went through to that same lake next to Temple of Time, got whatever it was in the middle, and then the pacing out of it was perfect. Like, they altered the terrain, they moved in, some areas to rest, so you weren't swimming all of the time. And it's like one example of like, okay, they iterated on this area. But every location and place I went through for those 100 hours had that very classic Nintendo pacing and like no downtime or no struggle to get through an area. And that in itself is, to me as a game designer, is like absolutely mind-blowing that you can maintain that level of polish and quality and pacing across this whatever 16 kilometer or however big this area is space, that maintaining that constantly is it's a masterpiece at that point. Like another sort of small story to kind of explain this is the game I was playing right before it was Horizon Zero Dawn, and like I played it for 3 days before Zelda came out, and I was loving my time with Horizon Zero Dawn. I think it's a great game. But go into Zelda for 100 hours, and then I came back once I wrapped credits on Zelda, and I couldn't play it anymore, which completely surprised me as someone who loves open world game design. And it was that kind of same experience that I had with Half-Life, where I remember playing Sin, the shooter by Ritual, before Half-Life came out, and it was very cool and it was nice, but Half-Life was such a fundamental shift and milestone in first-person shooter design that like you can only really it kind of divides time at that point, like pre and post Half-Life. And for me with Zelda, it's the same thing. It's like it's going to be hard for me to go back to the pre-Breath of the Wild tropes in open world level design and game design now that I've experienced it. And there's like, a million other things that's great about how the systems work, how the cooking works. Like I could go on for hours about how great Breath of the Wild was, but like that they've made an open world that's as polished as a linear game in some respects. And for me, that's mind-blowing, and I loved every second of it.
My favourite game has been gone for over a year to this point, but that will soon change. Season 5 is coming, and I know I said that last year, but it is coming for definite, and it's coming very, very soon. For now, pencil in early 2018 into your diaries. We have over half of Season 5 recorded as of this going out, and remember, we've not even announced the entire guest lineup for the season. This special only contains some of that lineup, but needless to say, you ain't seen nothing yet. Stay tuned to our socials on Twitter at MFG Podcast or at Johnny Cone, please follow me, and at facebook.com/myfavoritegamepod, as well as myfavoriteGame.net for when the deets drop. From a wider perspective, 2017 didn't even try to improve on 2016. As you could probably tell even from the Wolfenstein segment, 2017 was shit. And that isn't even close to a third of it. Or even a fifth, or 10th, or 20th of it. Okay, let's just call it what it is. It's been a shit year. It's been awful. Fuck 2017. But in regards to gaming, this year was something truly, truly special. It's been the best year yet since the PS4 Xbox One generation began, easily the best release year of the decade so far, and one of the best years in gaming ever, if not the best. Even with the release of a new BioWare IP in Anthem, a new God of War, Far Cry 5, Rockstar's first new game in 5 years, and its first true new game for PS4 and Xbox One, with Red Dead Redemption 2, Valkyria Chronicles 4, yes, and Year 2 of the Switch. The sound of the end is 2 Morgs HD and in VR, yeah! 2018 has a lot to live up to compared to 2017. Even if on paper it still looks like it'll be another great year for games. But considering the amount of games that have come out this year, the broad diverse lineup of games across many genres, platforms and more, and considering the high standard of quality, 2017 will take some difficulty to beat. So if you have an insane backlog from this year, or completed a ton of games from this year, be thankful to developers and publishers for the amount of work they've put into their games and for an incredible lineup for 2017. And if I can provide one last bit of advice, no matter your playstyle, no matter your preference of genre, no matter whether you're a single player or multiplayer gamer, or both, there is one word that comes to mind right now. Play. Because there has never been a better time to play games. So what are you waiting for? Play!
Don't dance 'cause I want to.